Welcome back, and joining me for a closer look at what's played out on the market scene today is Muhammed Wagley from Sasfin Wealth. Thank you so much for your time, Muhammed. More regions receiving tariff letters, including the European Union and Mexico, where the U.S. has imposed a 30% tariff on those regions. Has this triggered anything in the markets?
Hey Zanati, obviously always a pleasure to be on. And, to answer your question, I think we've seen muted responses. And I think generally that's been the name of the game just in relation to tariffs over the past month or so. It definitely feels like there's a level of oversaturation fatigue, I suppose, from a market perspective. You went through the numbers a little bit earlier. Those movements could happen sort of on any sort of down day, at least with reference to the UK, to the EU. So I wouldn't read too much into the performance on the day. And, if I see the rhetoric coming out the EU in particular, which is along the lines of, 30% or anything above 30% basically prohibits trade entirely. Yeah. It looks like there's a lot of posturing going on, a lot of room being left open for further negotiations. And I imagine that that's also how this is going to play out. Remember, the deadline is August 1st. And if they're saying that, look, we're not going to do anything at 30%, it computes that there will be some sort of compromise at some value less than that. So let's see how it plays out. But I think it's more about this sort of taco trade, that Trump always chickens out, and especially in relation to the tariffs, it seems that the market has really taken that to heart, because I'd have expected a little bit more movement. And then, if you look at the US, also they have just, really absorbed it, not seeing too much of an impact there.
Yeah, even me. I mean, it's quite interesting to see how overpowering this taco trade is, because when I was reading just even the number of financial institutions that were coming out to say that this is concerning in terms of then how the economic landscape could look in the EU, I thought that maybe the markets would panic a little bit, but actually nothing. So, I mean, yeah, we must just be happy that at least the markets are staying put, at least until the 1st of August. Well, talking about trade, let's go into trade data that was released out of China for June. We actually had imports growing for the first time this year, and exports actually surprising to the upside. What is this data telling us?
Okay. So look, let's just start with that export number, because I do think that there is a bit of a caveat here. So we saw that as per the June numbers, there was a climb in exports, but I believe it was 5.8% year on year, which is relatively substantial. But reading between the lines, it seems like there's a lot of front loading going on. Companies and individuals prepping for, the tariff deadline. They did get a little bit of a reprieve. I believe it was in May. So I think that's being factored in. So one has to take that specific export data with a pinch of salt. I think more encouraging, and you did touch on it, was the growing import data. And I think this is relevant just given, the massive concern that we've seen just in general for years now at this point in relation to Chinese demand. So this was the first time we saw an increase this year. So good to see sort of a step in the right direction. If I was reading into it, I'd say that maybe those stimulus measures that they were quite aggressive at implementing sort of towards the end of the year, beginning of this year, starting to pull through. So hoping that this could be an indicator that maybe the trend is shifting. But to answer that question, it's just a little bit too soon, but definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and you're actually right, considering that it is the first time this year that they actually grew. Maybe we need more data to actually see if that trend can be sustained. Although as much as they did grow 1.1%, we do note that expectations were for growth of 1.3%. So still below what analysts had anticipated. So we'll see how those numbers match up with analyst expectations in the coming months. Well, let's come back home and take a look at the JSE companies that came out with news today. South 32 gave us an update on the Mosul aluminium smelter in Mozambique. And this is on issues of the supply of electricity beyond March 2026. We did see that stock plunging almost 6%. And actually looking at the resources complex, because that complex was actually in the green. So meaning that there were specific South 32 issues that investors saw that made them sell off their shares. What could this uncertainty and a potentially negative outcome mean for South 32?
Look, so we did get the update from the company today, and I will say that it isn't necessarily new news. The company's alluded to this in the past. Essentially, just to touch on that uncertainty, it looks like we're seeing a lot more of that now, just because there's question marks like, is this deal going to get done? You mentioned earlier that they'd been negotiating with the relevant Mozambican authorities as well as ISCOM, just to get this through, and that's been going on for the past 6 years. We're slowly but surely getting much, much closer to that March date. And the question I think investors are asking themselves is, well, is this actually going to happen? There's a lot of doubt over that. Now, sort of to answer that question, it doesn't seem to me that this is sort of the biggest deal within the life of sort of South 32, but I think for the relevant Mozambican authority, this is, relatively important. There is a lot of incentive from all sides, to actually come to the negotiating table and get a deal here. I would still assume that this is going to go through eventually. Nobody really benefits if, that lease expires in March 2026 and nothing happens subsequent to that. But South 32 did note that they are putting a provision in their 2025 numbers just to reflect this uncertainty. And I think on the back of that, we saw quite a negative movement. If you were someone, though, that was massively bullish on South 32, I would imagine this just presents a buying opportunity because, as I said earlier, this wasn't really anything new. It was just an update on the company's part, and then them just sort of doing something prudent and recognizing that there is still uncertainty here, and we're having sort of a provision for that in the numbers, and that's really why we saw the downturn. If you love the company, this is a buying opportunity. If you went sort of too bullish on it, it doesn't really make too much of a difference.
Nothing new for South 32, and also not too big in terms of the South 32 universe, but actually for the economy of Mozambique, quite big, because I saw that the economic value from that is about 3% of GDP. So it really, really would benefit everybody if this, they actually did reach an agreement. Well, let's take it to ArcelorMittal. They released an interim trading statement today, and they also gave us an update on the long steel business. Of course, a point of focus for, I think, the last about a year and a half, 2 years or so. So they're saying that they expect their loss to shrink in the interim period slightly, though, but also saying that there's been very little progress made on, I guess, kind of removing those structural inhibitors to growth for the long steel business. Of course, the share price took a further knock of more than 4%. What did the market get out of that update?
Look, well, just based on the share performance, and I think it recovered a little bit perhaps there towards the end of there. I think it was a little bit worse off when I checked earlier. The market was very unhappy with this, and it was there were quite a few reasons why. They first sort of taken money from the IDC. That's about 16 billion rand, so massively substantial. In addition to that, the government helped with, implementing tariffs as well. And then you hit the nail on the head. It seems the issues that were there then, which were inhibiting growth and recovery, remain very much the crux of the issues that they face today. So it's really, as you described, those energy prices as well as the issues with the rail, and that doesn't look like it's going anywhere. And basically the companies come out and said that without further government help, we're going to have to be laying off people are going to be losing jobs, and it's a substantial amount of jobs. We're talking 3,000 plus, so it really is a terrible situation that the company finds themselves in. They're now actively looking to apply a bit of pressure and see if government can put further tariffs, on cheap imports. Doesn't look like they're going to have too much luck from that perspective, given, everything I just described, that the prevailing issues, from a year ago, whenever it was, remain the issues today. It seems that no steps have been taken in the right direction. So I thought this made for really depressing reading, I've got to tell you. It doesn't seem like this is something that they're going to get out of anytime soon. It doesn't seem like there's much hope for a recovery case here. So yeah, very bleak. And if anything, perhaps the share price performance didn't reflect how depressing this was, I've got to say.
Yeah, and September is now, and they were saying that they actually would have to start winding down operations and just preparing even before the end of September. Well, let's get to your stock pick for today, Muhammed. What are you choosing?
Yeah, so for a change, I've gone local. I'm quite quite excited about it. I've gone for a property company, Serious
Okay.
Real Estate. They're a rand hedge. Pretty much all of its exposure is in northern, sort of Western Europe. We've got a lot over in the UK, but it seems that the main focus here is in Germany. They're very well positioned to benefit from the increasing defense spend in Germany and the UK. They've got access to massive vacant land, and then they've got about 5 billion rand worth of firepower, dry powder, really, which they can use to benefit from the trend further. Now, I don't think it's unfair to say that around like 230 rand, or rather 23, that it is pretty fully valued. But I do think there's still quite a bit of juice there. I do like the story, I like the positioning, and I like the trend going forward. So my stock pick, Serious Real Estate.
Thank you so much for your time and for your analysis on what has moved investors' money today, Muhammad. Really appreciate it. That was Muhammed Wagley from Sasfin Wealth.